When is the best time to see the Northern Lights? That's probably the most asked question regarding the Northern Lights. And in this video, I'm going to give you a complete answer to that question. So generally, the Northern Lights season goes from September to March, but when is the best time for you to go? That's why I've made this guide so that you can determine when is the most ideal time for you personally to go and see the Northern Lights. And make sure you stick around till the end of the video because I'll summarize the whole thing in a super handy month-by-month overview. So grab a pen and a notepad because you're in for a ride. Quick side note, some of these points are going to be more from a landscape photography perspective, but all of this information is going to be useful for anyone planning a trip to see the aurora. And if you want to learn more about photographing the Northern Lights, I'll leave a link to one of my other videos up here. Point number 1 is temperature. So the Northern Lights are most visible within the Arctic Circle, and that's all the way up north, and it tends to get pretty cold up there. So from November until March, the temperatures in the Arctic tend to drop, and January and February tend to have the lowest average temperatures. If you want to avoid this extreme cold in the Arctic, it's best to go in the beginning of the Northern Lights season, so September or October. The average temperature also determines what clothes you will need to bring or maybe even purchase if you, for example, live somewhere perpetually warm, under the palm trees, in the beach, by the ocean, and you don't own any winter clothes. In those early months of September and October, you can manage with normal warm clothes. So a warm sweater, a jacket, and normal warm shoes. Whereas those real winter months might require some more extreme clothing, because you might be in places where the temperatures drop as low as -30 degrees. Point number 2, snow. It's important to consider when it starts to snow in the Arctic, and that's for a few different reasons. First one is that when it snows a lot, which it tends to do up there, some places might be inaccessible due to them being snowed over. Places like northern Norway, for example, generally have a pretty good system of keeping the main roads clear, but still some spots will be inaccessible. So it's a good thing to keep in mind that you'll have some less options when it comes to locations during this period of heavy snow. And that's usually from end of November until March. The amount of snow also determines what kind of activities outside of Northern Lights chasing you can or cannot do. If you want to go dog sledding or snowmobiling or do other winter activities, of course it's best to go when there is more snow. But if you want to go hiking, for example, it's best to go earlier in the season so that the trails are accessible. Point number 3 is the season. This point is kind of related to snow, but I wanted to talk about it separately because it might be more relevant if you're looking at this from a photography standpoint. What I want to talk about is the look of the landscape and how it changes throughout the Northern Lights season. In the beginning of the Northern Lights season, the autumn colors start to appear, so you'll be able to capture some beautiful colors in the sky, but also in the landscape. Of course, in the beginning of September, there will be less autumn colors than, let's say, in the middle of October, and by the end of November, most of the trees will have lost their leaves. As soon as it starts to snow, basically all the colors in the landscape disappear, and you're left with fairly monotone snowy landscapes. And this can still be very interesting and you can create some really cool images, but they'll just look very, very different. Another important thing to keep in mind is that during these earlier months of the season, September and October, the rivers and the lakes remain ice-free. The beauty of this is that you're able to see the Northern Lights in the sky and you can see them reflected in the water at the same time. But once the waterways and lakes freeze and get covered by that first winter snow, that won't be possible. But not to worry too much, areas on the coast of course still offer reflections in the beautiful fjords. Anyway, it's important to keep these changes in mind because the snow and the ice will completely change the landscape. And you can go to the same location in autumn and in winter and it will look completely different and you'll end up with completely different photos. Point number 4, tourism. Popular Northern Lights destinations such as Tromsø in Norway have a peak tourist season within the Northern Lights season. And that's the period around Christmas and New Year's. And that's simply because people have time off work and a lot of people like the idea of spending Christmas and New Year's in a snowy, wintry place. So there's going to be a lot more people around, prices will go up, hotels get full, tour companies are busy, and so on. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely a great way to spend the holidays and to celebrate New Year's under the Northern Lights. But if you're looking for a more quiet experience, you should avoid going at this time. Point number 5, daylight. You might not know this, but in the northernmost regions of Earth, there are 2 months in the year when the sun does not rise above the horizon. And this is what's called the polar nights. As the polar region tilts away from the sun during the winter, areas that are on the Earth's day side do not receive any direct sunlight as the sun stays below the horizon. So this period brings a lot of long and dark nights, which makes it very popular for aurora hunting. Whereas in early September, for example, the days are much longer and nighttime only starts at around 7 p.m. The polar nights are also important to keep in mind for your daytime activities, because the days will be very short, so you won't have that much daylight to go out and do other things. Having said that, the polar nights also make for a very special atmosphere in the Arctic, and this eternal blue hour can create some really cool opportunities for landscape photography. Point number 6, equinoxes. There is some speculation that the vernal and autumnal equinoxes, so around 20th of March and 20th of September, are especially good times to see the northern lights. There are more geomagnetic storms in the Earth's magnetic field at this time, meaning more photons and electrons make it through to the atmosphere to cause the aurora. Combine this with slightly warmer temperatures and better weather conditions with the possibility of less cloud cover, and late September or late March might seem like the ideal time to go aurora hunting. But on the other hand, you'll have to stay up later for your chance to see them because the daylight hours are longer. Point number 7, the moon. If you've been attentive throughout this video, then you might have picked up on the fact that the darkness of the night is a very important factor in seeing the northern lights. That means when there's a big bright moon in the sky, it makes it a little bit harder to see the northern lights. But it really comes down to the strength of the aurora. A weak display might be drowned out by the light of the moon. However, if the aurora is very strong, the full moon can actually make the view all the more extraordinary. It can light up the foreground and change the color of the sky from a black to a deep blue. So if you want to avoid a full moon, you can actually check the phase of the moon online before planning your trip. Okay, so these were the 7 points that I think are really important to consider when you're planning your Northern Lights trip. And I really think that this is the most complete answer to that age-old question of when is the best time to see the Northern Lights. Let's quickly summarize everything and have a look at a month-by-month overview. In September, the temperatures are mild, there is no snow. It's the start of autumn, so there'll be some color in the landscape. There's not so many tourists around, the days are long and the nights are short, and around the 20th of September there is the autumnal equinox. In October the temperatures are still mild, there's still no snow, it's mid-autumn so lots of color in the landscape, and tourism is going up a little bit but it's still reasonable, and the days and the nights are normal. However, there is no equinox. In November, the temperatures are dropping and it's getting a little bit colder. There is a possibility of snow and it's the start of winter. Tourism is still reasonable and the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting longer. And there is no equinox. In December, the temperature has dropped and it's pretty cold. There's usually lots of snow and it's obviously winter. Tourism is going up with its peak at Christmas. The days are short and the nights are long and there is no equinox. In January, it's still cold, there is still a lot of snow and it's still winter. Tourism is still pretty high due to New Year's, and the days are short and the nights are long with no equinox. In February, it's still cold, there's still a lot of snow and it's still winter. Tourism, however, is getting more reasonable with shorter days and longer nights. However, no equinox. In March, it's still pretty cold, there's still a lot of snow. However, it is the end of winter and tourism is dropping. The days and nights are back to normal and we have vernal equinox at the 20th of March. I hope that this information is helpful to anyone planning to see the Northern Lights, and that it finally answers that age-old question of when is the best time to see the Northern Lights. And I know that the answer might be different for everyone, but that's the whole point of this guide, because at least now you can determine when is the best time for you to go see the Northern Lights. Thanks a lot for watching, consider subscribing if you aren't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!